Like and subscribe, check out the Instagram, now let's dive. When we left off last episode, we had just discussed the bizarre server one user had uncovered and tapped into. And unsurprisingly, according to his testimony, it was filled with the sorts of things you can imagine. But what is a bit more surprising is that in this same interview that you can't find online almost anywhere, our valiant friend reports that in the coming days, problems began to emerge for him and his family. Now, if you haven't seen the first episode, I'd recommend checking that out first, but part 2 is also still enjoyable as a standalone. So what then did he experience after exploring the Comet Ping Pong servers? The first strange happening for our friend was that a few days after cracking into the servers, while he was in his office working, and his son was in the other room towards the front of the house, he began hearing through his door his son yelling for him. And the layout of the house is shotgun style, he explains, so that you can see straight out to the front door from the hallway of his office. And so when he heard the child screaming for him and he went into the hallway and he saw a man peering in through the front glass of his door, he was pretty caught off guard. The man quickly made eye contact with our friend and then he ran. This is obviously immensely creepy. This man's child and house were being scouted by a strange man. Could it have just been an intruder? Perhaps, but given the context and the timing, I find that doubtful. Even stranger though is that our friend will report just a few days after this incident that one of his work trucks was badly damaged, seemingly having been run into by another car. The perpetrator of this incident also fled and was never found. And this was quite the shift for a man who just a few weeks prior could never have anticipated any of this happening. But based on the interview, what seemed to catch him most off guard was that when he tried reporting these incidences to the police, like what he had found on the Comet Ping Pong server, the police completely ignored him. He would call, report it to the officer, then get transferred to another officer, then to another, then to a detective, then to another, and then the phone call would die, or they just wouldn't pick up the phone. And this same pattern occurred not over just a couple of days, but over several weeks of trying to get this information to the police. They just simply wouldn't take it. And from what I can ascertain, no report was ever filed on the police's end, showing us that if we weren't sure already, this corruption certainly does run deep. Thankfully though, there is a bit of a positive side to this story. The man who snuck behind Comet Ping Pong's firewalls is still active on Twitter, meaning he most likely isn't dead, although these days we can't be sure for certain. But it's the little wins that keep us going, you guys. 2:46 a.m. and I'm editing this video, and I realized when I watched through the interview a little bit of it again with this guy, he talks about how someone was arrested by the police that was in his bushes in a full ghillie suit and a mask, watching his house and his family. And as it turns out, that's actually true. There's an article to this, but I wanted to add that in here because we have more evidence that this guy was actually under duress by somebody or some organization. Okay, so now we're gonna go all the way back to the guy that we started this video series talking about, a man named Edgar Welch. On December 4th of 2016, Edgar, allegedly knowing some of this information that we've discussed about the servers and about the emails, was incredibly convinced that Comet Ping Pong was the epicenter of the Clinton family spearheaded Washington, D.C. ring. Edgar was also, for some strange reason, under the impression that there was a basement to Comet Pizza, for which there is not, although at the time there was theory circulating about a basement because Alefantis hints at a basement by showing an unfinished room and a hole being dug with a ping pong table in the background, effectively baiting a proverbial hook. But it was pretty commonly understood and debunked among the more conspiratorial side of the internet that the basement alluded to was not at Comet Ping Pong, but rather another place known as the Pegasus Museum. But that, you guys, is a rabbit hole for later. But I wanted it to be clear that it wasn't really suspected that there was a basement of Comet Ping Pong, and no one who wasn't a spook thought that the kids were actually down in the basement of this place. So now, back to Edgar. I want to preface that the following narrative I'm going to tell a short bit of is solely from the mainstream media. That being that Edgar Welch had been a serious follower of the pizza incident findings and was deeply entranced in the idea of the elite pedo ring being run out of Comet Pizza, which is already a red flag because, as discussed, most didn't think it was literally being run out of Comet Pizza, as in there weren't children there. In spite of that fact though, we were told he was reading all the emails and that he understood what was happening to a pretty high level. And so Edgar drove from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., parked outside of Comet Pizza, and then was arrested an undetermined amount of time later, which I guess to be around 15 to 30 minutes. We aren't really certain exactly of the time, but that's about all we really know. Now, in the comments, I'm sure you're saying, but Cooper, it was a mass shooting. Like 10,000 people lost their lives and it's a national tragedy, and that's why we have a National Ping Pong Day. I mean, I'm joking, obviously. If you're watching part 2 of this video, you likely know better than that. Although it is worth noting that many people I've had this conversation with are under the impression that a mass casualty event did occur that day. And that is in large part due to the mainstream media and slop tubers. But something even more bizarre to me than that, because it's about what I expect from the internet, is that the narrative around that day has become solidified even deeper than just the superficial level. I sat in a class one time where the professor and students actually thought people were shot and died, and that it was all just crazy, deranged Trump supporters engaging in a conspiracy theory. Besides the point, I don't want to yap too much. However, it's hard to blame people who believe Pizzagate was just a conspiracy entirely for a number of reasons. The main one being that, depending on what source you read, you are going to get a different account. Some will say that there were 3 shots fired, some will say 1, and as a later eyewitness will state, there were no shots fired at all. However, what all the sources left and right tend to agree on is that supposedly Edgar brought in his Colt-branded AR-15 into the Ping Pong Pizzeria and in so doing scared away all the customers. At which point, he walked around the restaurant, opened some doors, found nothing, until eventually, however, it is claimed that Edgar found a locked door where Alefantis later tells us it's just a coat room, which one would ask why your employee's coat closet is locked, but questions for another time, which is what went through Edgar's mind, we are told, as he assumed that the secret locked door hidden in the back must be the one that leads to the basement and or has the children right behind it. And so a man who claimed to be on the hunt for abducted children shot through said locked door, in so doing striking 3 children who would later succumb to their wounds. Now the last part is obviously false, but he did however manage to shoot through the thick wooden door from such a high angle that the bullet managed to fly straight through the wooden door and bury itself in the server resting obscured in the back of the room. But first of all, why is there a server in a pizza place anyway? And I presume this is the one that hosted the encrypted files, which we are told from the person who hacked into the server were hiding CP and CP related materials. Just a little point for reference. But what's most intriguing to me is that of all places this bullet could have landed, after going through the door where a guy doesn't know it's even in there, it flies through the top of this server and embeds itself in the hard drives. Yeah, okay, that's not sus. The one bullet lands exactly where the evidence is believed to be stored. The evidence that our computer friend from earlier managed to grab from off the website before it was buried behind new secret measures and firewalls. The same information that was hidden on the drives that our buddy here reported to the police that they then wouldn't take. The same information that Edgar supposedly saw just a short while before the shooting, and instead of using it to help bring down the ring, he drives hundreds of miles to destroy. All the while, from what I can tell, leaving no bullet hole in the door he supposedly shot through. For a guy who doesn't believe in coincidences like myself, that seems about 500 degrees beyond the realm of possibility and way more like something was staged. And maybe old Eddie here was part of something larger. But to recap, let's look at it from the other side so we can better make the argument that Edgar is a patsy. If I were James Alefantis, who I think it's worth noting, his name is almost an exact anagram for the French phrase on screen now that I won't be saying, and I were, in theory, in charge of managing a giant trafficking and ring of children, with the server containing the explicit materials and participant info being run out of my pizza shop, and it was just hacked by a random guy who's now making reports about it to the police, I would really want something to happen to that evidence, but obviously I can't destroy it because that makes me look guilty. So the best thing that could happen for me would be to have someone walk in, take a pot shot at the hard drive, thereby destroying all of the evidence, which takes all the attention off me, destroys the story's credibility, while simultaneously making this entire thing seem like a psychotic, deranged conspiracy, because after all, I only sell pizza, right? That's exactly right. In fact, after this, the public will then recognize me as the victim of what? Some crazy online conspiracy. And forever and ever, the term Pizzagate will be labeled an alt-right conspiracy theory. And it's low-key genius because it worked. Bro even got a GoFundMe that got like 30 grand out of this, just a little food for thought. It's obvious at this point when you really take a second glance that something is up, but when you have the entire establishment media and most of social media telling you otherwise, most people aren't going to look any further than that, when in reality, the literature says exactly what's going on. And so that's basically how this story has sat until now, outside of a few people online who have really dove into it. But prepare yourself, because we're about to go somewhere where I don't believe anyone else has gone yet, and there really is no coming back. It should be fairly obvious at this point that Edgar Welch is likely to be a patsy, and as we've seen over the past few centuries, those come in many flavors: desperation, addiction, programming like MKUltra, and a host of other options. But almost always what we see are 2 common traits for a patsy. The first are really bizarre family members with creepy connections to the government that don't make sense but seem too strange to ignore, which Edgar's lineage meets with flying colors, or top secret colors one could say. And the second is a bit more difficult to explain, so first, there's an elephant in the room that I want to address, which should help to make this second patsy tradition make more sense. When I started diving into Edgar and his family, I asked myself if there was any chance we could settle this whole debate about the gate and just ask the man himself what happened that day. And so I started looking Edgar up, and the vaguest memory sparked in my mind upon doing so about something I had heard many months back. It was a case involving Edgar, and it happened on January 4th of this very year, in fact. According to the official narrative, Edgar was traveling down the road outside of Kannapolis, North Carolina around 10 p.m. when a police officer claims to have recognized the vehicle Edgar was driving, and based on his own testimony, believes that he just knew deep inside that this incredibly common vehicle was Edgar's, and that Edgar must be up to no good, and that Edgar also had warrants. And this officer was so good, according to all the articles I've read, he didn't even need to run the plates, as that is not mentioned as happening anywhere, nor was Edgar speeding. So I think a good lawyer could find some wiggle room in there. And at this point, the cop walks up to the door to arrest Edgar, and in the middle of their interaction, Edgar pulls out a gun he had hidden in his shirt and starts pointing it out the door and waving it around. The cops, in their own reports, tried to tell him to stop, but it doesn't seem like they did for very long, because shortly thereafter, the group of officers unloaded into Edgar, and as is popular slang, most especially in American hoods, they turned him into Swiss cheese. Interestingly, there was not one but two other passengers in the car, including the mysterious driver, which is where things in my mind get really bizarre if they weren't already. We have no idea who these passengers were, and no reporting has come from them, which I imagine you would at least make a post, maybe even on social media, after your friend was murdered right before your eyes. Or I dare say they should have at least been interviewed by the media, but there's none of that. But also, I thought it was Edgar's car and that's why the stop was initiated. But then why isn't he the one driving? Even stranger, the police briefing on their Facebook, all of the passengers were still in the vehicle when the shooting took place. So presuming one of these cops is by the window where Edgar is sitting, and another one is probably in front of the front windshield, and the third one, who was not one of the officers to shoot, is also standing there, it's sort of incredible the traffic stop gone bad. But most importantly to me, with this act, the police filled Patsy tradition number 2 right on in, killing the only actual witness to the events of that day outside of Comet Pizza, leaving us with a story that doesn't hold up very well under scrutiny. Something about this event was so bizarre to me. I tried to find whatever I could and see if I could get in contact with someone who might have access to the footage, because as you might notice, there's going to be basically zero footage of this online, except for one angle from one news report that shows the car from the other side of the street. So basically completely useless for our purposes. But what I could notice from this footage is that there's a shop right next door that I would expect to have cameras pointing in the general direction of the incident in the car. And so I called the shop and I left them a message. And today, the day I recorded this audio, I got a call back from them when I was in the gym. Now, I didn't have any access to something to record the call, but I took a couple of notes. When we first got on the phone, they referred to me as Officer Edgar, which doesn't make any sense. And when I told them I wasn't a cop, they started getting very angry and asking why I was calling them and why I was investigating what had happened on that specific date. And that was my cue that something was wrong. The call didn't last much longer than that. They basically told me, goodbye, we don't have anything for you, and then ended the call. So make of that what you will. What most are unaware of is that outside of Edgar, there is no one else in the entire world, to our knowledge, who has any idea what happened inside of the restaurant that day, as the cameras outside of the restaurant were faced the wrong way, and the cameras inside the restaurant were either unplugged or facing the wrong way. So there is no video evidence of what transpired. But don't worry, all the cameras were in working order the next day, so everything's fine. Additionally, Edgar himself had been streaming some of the car ride from DC to North Carolina, where he was discussing his motives for doing this and wanting to protect his daughters, which makes about exactly the sense you would expect it to for the mainstream media narrative. But if we look a little bit deeper, if there is this guy who wants to spread the word and show that there are children inside of Comet Pizza, why wouldn't he have streamed his actual time inside of Comet Pizza, or at the very least recorded it? After all, if you wanted to prove that there were actually kids in there and have people believe you, that would have been the way to do it. And I tell you, having this footage would help us out a lot, because the story about what happened inside Comet is utterly bizarre, and to this day, we still don't actually know what transpired. First of all, I'm not able to pin anything down about just how many shots Edgar fired, which seems improbable to me because, you know, within 2 to 3 minutes of Edgar getting out of his car, dozens of police officers were already on the scene. It's not suspicious at all. And these officers arriving on scene would have been just around the same time as the people inside were leaving the premises. So you have dozens of eyewitnesses at this point. And among these eyewitnesses was one man who stayed in the restaurant longer than others, named Sharif Silmi, who was present playing ping pong with his wife as Edgar walked into Comet Ping Pong. And Sharif's account is incredibly important to us. Since he remained inside of the restaurant for longer, he saw much more than others. Sharif makes it clear that while he's playing ping pong, he sees Edgar walking around and basically bothering nobody, just there, you know? He seemed to just be searching for something or looking for a place to be. Up to nothing in particular, just walking around checking doors. But the weird thing that Sharif did notice and archive in 3 separate tweets was that Edgar had walked in with not a rifle, but a shotgun, which is a pretty big difference from the story that we have been told, for a reason we'll get into in 1 second. First though, an AR and a shotgun are not typically very difficult to distinguish from one another, as they're very different looking guns. But even more important, the bullet hole that enters into the server and destroys the hard drive absolutely belongs to a rifle based on the fact that it is just one hole, rather than a shotgun, which is what Edgar, according to Sharif, the eyewitness, and apparently the only eyewitness to the events, stated that Edgar was using. Something you absolutely must keep in mind. And while playing ping pong and noticing that Edgar was carrying a shotgun inside the restaurant, Sharif evidently had enough time to spot the difference and then catalog the scene as he watched Edgar head to the back of the restaurant, where he states that, quote, "I think he was trying to stash the shotgun in the back to use later on." Which brings up several questions. 1, we get this story of an irate Edgar with a rifle bursting into combat ping pong in the stories from the media, but oddly enough, absolutely nowhere is a shotgun mentioned in the story. And question 2 is that if Edgar entered the store so calmly that people didn't immediately run out when they noticed the guy with the gun trying to shoot it up, then what really was happening in there? And if Edgar truly was stashing a gun for later, then what was the real intention he had for that day? Or another way of saying that is, what was the actual plan he had been given? Moreover, Sharif has another critical interaction via the interwebs for us that gives us another key detail. And this interaction occurs with several journalists over Twitter who ask him for his permission to use his information and pictures in their articles. One of whom is named Phoebe, who worked for the Washington Post, and still does, meaning she and a major news organization were fully aware of what appears to be the only known eyewitness to the events and what he is saying, and yet the Washington Post and Phoebe would go on to ignore Sharif's sightings and just take his photos and publish the exact same stories that everyone else was about a crazy man with an AR. And it should go without saying, but what's missing from these reports is the reference to the shotgun that Edgar had. And that's just too weird for me. I'm not one to disparage eyewitnesses, and this man is apparently the only one, and so clearly from what he's telling us, he watched it happen, and the shotgun was in the building, and Edgar was seen stashing it in his own words. So then, why leave it out of basically all of the reports except for a very select few? And interestingly, even the police report, which does include the shotgun, does it in a really weird manner, because unlike the rifle and the pistol that Edgar supposedly had with him, they don't give a brand or caliber for the shotgun. It just says shotgun and some ammo. Call me crazy, but I think the shotgun in this testimony from Sharif may be hiding a lot more than we may ever know. It's worth noting though who Sharif is, because once again, he's another highly connected DC attorney, and he owns his own practice. Just something to put out there. But above all, what stands out to me is that Sharif, in his own reporting, heard not 3 shots, not 1 shot, but 0 shots ring out in the store, and he didn't see any either. So how then did the guy that was in the store not hear the shots ring out? Also, it appears that this story of shots ringing out didn't start until later, when mainstream media started publishing stories about it in the following hours. Mull that one around for you. Alright, so now more history on Edgar, a man who, despite growing up in the age and generation of share everything online, has merely a small handful of verified photos of himself online, which is the beginning, or really the continuation, of a long trend of patsy traditions that this fellow embodies. Before I get ahead of myself though, Edgar was born on April the 29th of 1988 in North Carolina. He has a profile on something called couchsurfing.com that references having spent time living in Haiti, although that time is completely unaccounted for anywhere else. And the only other real lead that we get on what he did with his time from whom to comment is that when looking up his name with nothing pizza related, you're going to find that he has an IMDb page and that he has acting, producing, and writing credits. And all of the productions he was involved in are atrocious. I had to actively seek out one of his projects that he was on, entitled The Mill, and here's a clip from that for you.
Hey there, stud muffin.
My name's Ralph.
How are you doing, baby?
Madison, I told you I couldn't sell any more beer. I almost got in trouble last time.
Oh, honey, no one's gonna find out. I won't tell if you won't tell. It'll be our little secret.
No more beer.
How much, dumb? Bring it up.
$6.14 with the cheer wine.
but it should hit you like the bully in a 1990s film that the guy we are slowly making the case for, being a patsy, has a background in theater and acting, which seems like a mighty convenient little fact. Indeed, I did my best, but there, to my knowledge, is nothing else we can learn about Edgar, so let's take a look then at the next best thing, that being who he's related to, namely who his parents are. Disclaimer, this is all readily available information. That being said, I'm not going to include the link to the website I found, but sifting through IMDb, I found that Edgar's father's name is Harry Welch Jr., and he owns what is at face value a production company. I can't mess with you. The name of this production company, Forever Young Productions, which Forever Young is a well-known reference to what happens when a child dies young, because they are then forever young in popular conception, as they never got a chance to grow old. What an incredibly bizarre thing based on the situation we're discussing, but let's continue. When I found Edgar's dad's bio online, I thought at first that this might be useless, but in fact it was a gold mine for intel. Never in my now year plus of making these investigative YouTube videos have I seen such a readily available chunk of information for us just sitting there, which as we'll continue, might be a sign to be suspicious about. So reviewing Harry's biography, we're going to learn a lot. First is that he introduces his family members where we find Edgar Madison's name along with his siblings, therefore we know we are looking at the correct guy. Continuing on, Harry discusses how he had been in broadcasting for 25 years, which sounds fishy because broadcasting is incredibly vague, and 25 years leaves about a decade unknown about him since his picture paints him somewhere in his 60s in my opinion. And as I was writing this, I saw a link that I had missed, and it answers a lot of the questions that we had about Edgar's father, because it leads to Harry's law enforcement experience page, where we learn that Harry, somehow with apparently no credentials, was a member of, in his words, various federal, state, and local task forces fighting the war on drugs, including 5 years with the Rowan County ABC Police. Someone below, please tell me what the ABC Police are, because the only things I could get were cartoons for children. But the rest of his career amounts to the typical spook stuff, watching people commit crimes and instigating people to commit crimes, and then arresting them for the crimes that he instigated, just like the government does. Additionally, he also worked alongside the ATF, which is one of my least favorite three-letter terrorist agencies. And as of the time this was written, Edgar's father was supposedly still a deputy with his county's sheriff's department. The connections, though, continue on a different page when we get a deeper look at who Harry is. Mind you, I have to leave out a lot of stuff on this guy because there is so much information he gives us. Okay, but according to his website, Harry was awarded in some wildly impressive ways. His church named him Father of the Year in 1997. He was given an invitation by the US Defense Department to go all the way to Europe and watch the joint US and German armies conduct war games. Wow. 1, what an honor to be voted best parent, and 2, what the heck are you saying? That's an absurdly niche thing to get invited to, if you can even get an invite to something like that. But keep that in mind, it's one of our first major red flags. Harry also tells us that he's been a qualified Boy Scout counselor for decades, so he's around your kids, was elected president of the North Carolina Crime Stoppers organization, has fostered 3 children and hundreds of dogs, with 30 to 50 on his property at any one time, while simultaneously teaching Sunday school for 20 consecutive years as of the early 2000s. Alongside all of this, he has been a church deacon and served 2 terms on the Boy Scouts of America Central North Carolina board. So then we should ask, what hasn't this fellow done? It's a smorgasbord of things all over the place. But above all, what really stood out to me and had my jaw dropping when I read it was the following entry on his website. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan selected me to join 15 other, quote, broadcasters to visit U.S. military installations in Colorado. We received national clearance from the U.S. Defense Department to visit the Cheyenne Mountain Nuclear Bunker, the alternate command center for NORAD. That is beyond weird and strange and suspicious, and all that would be insanely cool to think about, dumb as being deep underground military base systems. So all in all, this is like saying you got a free invite to Groom Lake to use their ice cream machine. Groom Lake being the military name for Area 51. So for Edgar Madison Welch's father to state that he got an invite by Ronald Reagan personally, along with 15 other, quote, broadcasters, is beyond words wild. So my next question then is, what do you mean by you're a broadcaster? Because you evidently aren't just some dude on the radio, and your portfolio also says you make movies, yet you haven't made a film in 12 years and the last thing that you produced was a trailer for that film. However, what struck me most and really made me feel gross was this reference to Harry having served as the executive director for Protect a Child, a national nonprofit seeking to prevent the abuse and abduction of children. after which he was appointed by Governor Jim Martin to the Governor's Commission on Child Victimization. And so, considering the topic we're discussing, the dad of the alleged Comet Ping Pong shooter being the executive director of an organization trying to prevent child abuse is really off-putting. And once again, something didn't sit right with me about this. The details of the org were too obscure. The name Protect a Child seemed too vague, and the description didn't give any real info. And I tried looking up Protect a Child, even backdating my searches to before the internet, and I couldn't really find anything. Funny enough, the only time that the term Protect a Child pops up as the name of an organization, for which I presume is headquartered in North Carolina, is when Harry's IMDb page pops up in the search browser. So I'm starting to think some fibs are being told here. Or really, I'm becoming more convinced that fibs are being told here. But the weirdness does continue from here on out. Harry goes on to discuss in his bio that he picked up martial arts at age 40, but wishes he had done it sooner because he went undefeated in 200 matches, winning the North Carolina State Games. One, that's ridiculous for obvious reasons, but two, I don't even think North Carolina has a state games. Continuing though, he has been an NRA firearms instructor for over 35 years and is rated at such a high degree that he can train others trying to become certified instructors. Harry has also taught hundreds of civilians, feds, and military in the tactical use of weapons and concealed weapons. So now this man is so good he teaches the military how to use weapons. Okay. This is the same guy that also makes the terrible films, by the way, we looked at earlier. Don't forget. And I'm not messing with you. He is also allegedly an expert firearms witness recognized as such by the Supreme Court of North Carolina. And for the lady scoopers out there, he does give self-defense classes for women, so feel free to sign up. Where, I have no idea, but feel free to do it. But if this isn't James Bond, Hardy Boys, most mysterious man in the world enough for you yet, he's also set 7 world records in the Guinness Book of World Records. They include, but are not limited to, 715 push-ups on his fingertips, 3,821 push-ups on one arm, and 100 push-ups on one finger. Now that is exceptional considering the most one-arm push-ups isn't exactly a category. They are typically done based on time limits. For instance, there's a 1-minute limit, a 1-hour limit, and a 12-hour and a day limit. And Harry would blow these all out of the water. The data on these records is a bit hard to come by and to track down because of its relative obscurity, but the idea of someone completing 3,821 one-arm push-ups in any of these time frames is insane. That would require years of work to approach peak physique to even come close to this. Keeping this in mind though, I want to note that Harry tells us he felt loosest doing martial arts, but not when he was doing his thousands of push-ups every day training. But from what I can tell from the current records I found online, they don't even come close to what Harry claims to have done, so this is just an outright lie. But even more convincing is that I can't find a single record of Harry Welch Jr. ever setting one record, let alone 7. There is a 1982 record in the Guinness Book of World Records for a fellow named Paul Henry Lynch, who performed 760 one-arm push-ups. Yeah, 760 versus 3,800. Keep that in mind. So it is confirmed though that these record-setting stories are lies, which then makes me wonder what else has been fabricated here, because I also noticed that the majority of the bio is written in the third person, but at certain points it breaks into first person like Harry is writing it. And the photo of him on the site has no known repositories online, but it's also clearly clipped out of a different photo, as you can see some of the color leaking in for the background. I've edited quite a few photos, and that really stood out to me. Although at first I didn't find any known repositories of the photo online, I did research him on one of those Oznet facial recognition sites, and I got a ding for a government photo where he's sitting in front of an American flag, and then I followed that trail back to the article it supposedly came from, but the article didn't have the actual photo on there. I did, however, notice that it appears the photo that he is edited out from might also have the same American flag behind it, so it could have been taken in the same photo session. Sorry, not trying to be super confusing, but it seems like something is going on there and there's a deeper connection. Going back to that article though that this photo supposedly came from, there is an article about the Welch family that doesn't reveal much information, but does reveal some pretty important information. That being that the Welch family is extremely wealthy. Harry was left with possibly thousands of acres of land from his dad, who owned a media company from what I can gather. And then in the 2010s, a solar company is seeking to purchase some 400 acres of Harry's land to build a roughly $70 million solar farm that is then just going to rot into the ground, poisoning the land for decades to come, which is a big concern of the people in the neighborhood and in the community who were seeking to stop this whole acquisition from happening. I don't know if they did or not, that data is unclear, but some of the comments reveal that the families around Harry and the Welch family discuss how he's living off of all of his family's money and selling it is just going to be awful for the community. So there we go. From the locals, we get a little bit of a tidbit about who this guy actually is. And it would appear that he's not very well liked for reasons that might make more sense here in a little bit. But what is clear is that he also comes from quite a bit of money, especially considering the giant chunk of cash that they're going to get from the solar company over these acres that they are purchasing. This all being said, I tried to learn more about the family, but there really isn't much. Basically, all the information on Harry and his family comes from one news organization known as the SalisburyPost.com. And there's one other known photo I was able to find of Harry, and that comes from this article that was done interviewing him. But as far as I'm aware, we have no other known information about the family. So with all these weird, seemingly unconnected bits of information, some of which is verifiably false from Harry himself, it was at this point that I seriously began to contemplate if perhaps this entire persona was just generated online by someone else and was entirely fake. And if perhaps an organization, for the sake of a cover story for someone like us, who's really just seeking more information on Edgar, and by proxy his family, generated this information to throw us off the scent. But if so, that would mean that they would have had to have created all these fake films that he's made, one of which I have the trailer for because it was never really finished, and the other of which we watched a clip from and is atrocious. So those are real, at least some of the films that he's claimed to have been on. And in addition to that, there are site archives for his webpage going pretty far back to well before the shooting. So basically it's your choice of what's real and what isn't about this man, because he evidently lies a lot if he is real. It is beyond suspicious, though, that Edgar's father has seemingly an entire falsified online presence, and he cannot be verifiably pinned down in any capacity to any work, to any travel, to any people he knows, and even his family connections online and his ancestry connections don't make much sense to me. But we do know at least someone by the name of Harry Welch does live in that region, as the Solar Farm article discusses people knowing a Harry Welch. So to that point, there is someone by that name, but dude, I'm so confused. I don't even know what to say. All of this, though, makes me think that there could possibly be some more government collusion, because this is getting weird. But I can't leave you there. The family history does go deeper, and it's something that I've yet to see discussed anywhere else either, and that is Edgar's criminal record, most of which consists of degenerate activities like drunk driving or intoxicated driving, all of which seems to slip right off of his back, and from what I can tell, it would appear he never saw the inside of a cell. That I can't attest to, though, because the police are not exactly forthcoming with these records. But on October 25th of 2016, it seems things took a change for Edgar, as a guy who was typically involved in insular cases where he was the only one involved in wrecks, was arrested for running a kid over. The info here is almost zero, but we do know that Edgar struck a teenager who was walking with his friends when Edgar came in at 45 miles an hour and smacked right into him. People rushed to help this child, using shears to stop the bleeding until police arrived, who then had to use tourniquets to slow the bleeding even more, and eventually the child entered such a critical state that he had to be airlifted to a hospital. I'm unsure of what the child's fate was, but I do hope he didn't perish. That being said, though, it is a pretty serious charge that Edgar has now been met with, and I'm not surprised that the mainstream media has yet to ever bring it up, as this is the sort of charge that with Edgar's DUI-riddled history could get him locked away for decades and possibly even life if the kid had passed away, meaning that he should have been at least in jail when the Cant Pizza incident took place, or if he had good parents, completely under house arrest by them, or he would have just been in actual prison at this point. And yet none of these things can be true because, as we know, Edgar allegedly went on to enter Cant Pizza and engaged in the shooting, quote unquote. So one would have to wonder why Edgar would possibly have agreed to be the one, if he were a patsy, to participate in the staging of the Comet Ping Pong incident and the surrounding events. Edgar, as we can tell, comes from some semblance of money, doesn't seem to have worked, but always had a car and enough money to drink and travel to Haiti, and all of these serious previous charges that he was under just faded away, which really only happens with well-trained and expensive legal teams. His parents, based on his dad's profile, are connected to the government pretty deeply, although I suspect deeper than we are told, and the information online is a front for something more. They clearly have money, as we talked about, and none of them have pictures online beyond a handful to show, hey, these people are real. And so thinking of a child who was raised in a wealthy family with all these strange connections, one would expect that the only way he could really face trouble would be if he did something genuinely awful, if he messed up really, really bad. You know, like nearly murdering a kid, because that's a much harder charge to beat. So I'll admit this is speculation, but I do have to wonder if perhaps via those family connections to the state, an offer slipped down the proverbial, or maybe even literal, pneumatic tube, and it said, hey, we have this growing problem. I want you to go here, do X, Y, and Z. You just have to act crazy, and all you have to do is shoot a hard drive, then walk outside, kneel down and let the police arrest you, which happened, and then claim all you were doing was searching for the basement and for the kids. We'll give you a light sentence, which is exactly what happened. He only got 4 years, and since you served this term for the Cant Pizza incident, the charges you would have for mowing down a kid, they're gone. We wiped him away. And once you get out, as long as you remain silent, you're gonna get back to your life. And so if you ran a kid over and you got that offer, I wanna ask you genuinely, would you find it difficult to turn it down? To change a potential life sentence into only a 4-year one, and all you have to do is go and stage this incident? And I'm not saying it happened for sure, but it seems like the facts of this case are lining up pretty well to suggest that it did. And a little fact for you, the collision with the child happened on October the 25th of 2016, and the ping pong shooting happened on December 4th of 2016, so less than 6 weeks later. And the server information that this guy uncovered in the interview that we discussed earlier went public not too long after Edgar's collision. That all, though, is just a thought for you to think upon. And so now we sit in a precarious place. There clearly is a mountain of evidence to support the notion that something awry really is going on here. In fact, that was the growing sentiment in 2016 when all of a sudden the alleged shooting occurred. And it's because of this shooting that many people turned their minds off and stopped asking questions. Because obviously, if someone is going to do that and then find no children in the pizza joint, he must be crazy, right? And so the story was spun as the mainstream media does, and today that's all we have now. A crazy right-wing conspiracy theory created to make Hillary Clinton look bad so she would then go and lose the election. Because after all, there can't be kids in the basement if there is no basement, so the whole thing must be fake. Therefore, ignoring that almost no one at the time or today who really has investigated this believes that there were kids in the basement, because there is no basement. And also, to follow the mainstream media narrative, you'd have to ignore the fact that these emails are real and were verified by both WikiLeaks and the FBI as being such. Also, I think that the argument that this was to destroy Hillary Clinton's campaign is pretty silly, because Hillary Clinton doesn't need any help looking awful, politically speaking. I mean, if I were to just choose a scandal, I would go with the Clinton list. Anyway, besides the point, but not really, because there is something even deeper with these emails and files. Because what could possibly be worth hiring a troubled man to go and conduct this Comet Pizza shooting over? In my mind, the information already provided is enough, but there is another rabbit hole to fall down, and that is Dine Corp. Cooper, what on earth is Dine Corp? Great question. You know how when you were born, you were completely dependent on your mother and father? Or perhaps if you're a Reddit mod, you still are and can relate to that? Well, that's what Dine Corp is. A really fat baby whose mom and dad is the federal government, and this proverbial parent has an addiction worse than crack or fent. It's called global destruction. Dine Corp is a quote-unquote independent military and services contractor to the United States federal government. It raked in $3 billion last year in revenue, 96% of which came from the federal government, and that is basically what they've done for some 50 odd years, sucked the teat of the American taxpayer dry, producing overpriced tech services and sending contractors around the globe. And it's these contractors we really care about. So enter the following: a wire referencing communications with the Afghan Minister of the Interior, Hanif Atmar, who has been for many years one of the preeminent figures in that region. And the wire reads as follows. Summary: Assistant Ambassador Musemli discussed a range of issues with Minister of Interior MOI Hanif Atmar on June 23rd on the Kunduz Regional Training Center (RTC) Dine Corp event of April the 11th. Reftel. Atmar reiterated his insistence that the U.S. try to quash any news article on the incident or circulation of a video connected with it. He continued to predict that publicity would endanger lives. He disclosed that he has arrested 2 Afghan police and 9 other Afghans as part of an MOI investigation into Afghans who facilitated this crime of, quote, purchasing a service from a child, end quote. He pressed for CSTCA to be given full control over the police training program, including contractors. Musamli counseled that an overreaction by the Afghan government would only increase chances for the greater publicity the MOI is trying to forestall. Now, I brought up this one as it is a second portion to an original message that we will look at in a second. This one, however, dropped in 2009 and made some waves as we have a foreign leader asking the American government to quell a story in the American media, something that, based on how the nation allegedly operates, shouldn't occur. Obviously, though, we cannot ignore the clear reference to children, but this wouldn't all connect for us until 2016 with the Podesta email leak. People pretty quickly connected these two things for what they obviously were: suspicious communications about children, although this one is admittedly more obvious than the Podesta emails, as it references directly the purchasing of services from a child. Alright, so now we're at an awkward impasse. What kind of services could possibly be getting referenced right here? And it's a big deal that the Minister of the Interior is already chomping at the bit to cover up the events of this April 11th party by arresting and interrogating a bunch of people and asking for the American government to rein these cretin contractors in that were involved. After all, despite being in part 2 of this series, there is no way that there is an email that directly tells us that government operatives are engaged in the exact activities that we've been speculating, because that would be insane. And you'd be wrong. It is exactly what we think it is. The whole message is worth a read. That, however, is the response. I think there is an even more clear email that is worth reading. It's a little bit longer, so bear with me. This is from Cheryl Mills to Hillary Clinton. The date is 6/3 of 2009, and the subject is Dine Corp's post story, second shoe to drop, all caps. Folks, you may recall an April 17th post story on problems with Dine Corp in Afghanistan, which focused on a suspected drug overdose death. That overdose was likely not an overdose, if you're catching my drift. The other issue that surfaced at the time was a colossal error in judgment by one of the contractor's employees in hiring an adolescent boy dancer for some sort of event that, at least to most folks, looked very inappropriate. The post is now looking at the dancing boy, which was not included in the April 17th article, and we expect we'll soon publish a story on it. The post inquiry at this point focuses only on confirming whether or not there is an OIG investigation. We are of course referring the post to the OIG on such a question. However, the premise for the question raises the issue again in some eye-popping rhetoric which could feature in the follow-up story, so I want to make sure everyone had a heads up. We've already relieved the folks involved with both incidents, and I am meeting with the firm's CEO today to hear his reports on his trip to Afghanistan and Iraq to address these, as well as other issues on which we have demanded corrective actions. According to my reporting, the week of April 13th, the Dine Corp regional commander from Kunduz, Flint Chambers, allowed his men to hire a 15-year-old boy dancer to do tribal dances at a Dine Corp party on the training site. Some 15 or so Dine Corp employees in attendance pulled out a single chair and had the boy do mock lap dances. This was captioned on video. The video shows Dine Corp employees putting dollar bills in the boy's waistband, just as they would a stripper's garter. The revelry lasted about 45 minutes. The email later goes on to say that no sex took place. 3 of the people involved were fired, but we got about nothing else of interest in this. What is interesting though is that in no regard could you call this a tribal dance, while in the same exact email stating that they pulled out a chair and treated him like a stripper. And that would be because most are unaware of what exactly an Afghanistan dancing boy is. Not to mention that they're just totally lying to try and cover their butts, but that's a separate story. It should be noted that although they are trying to cover it up, they do make it clear that there is some pretty heinous stuff going on in the email. But they leave out a lot of details, especially about what exactly the dancing boy is. To the best of my knowledge, the original video of what happened, although clearly being referenced and saying that it was leaked, cannot be found anywhere online. That should just be a testament to the amount of absolute tomfoolery that's going on here. But nonetheless, there is a PBS documentary that goes into just how dark this practice is, which I played some clips from on screen. But it's very clear that this is not just a tribal dance. It's an incredibly dark and devilish sexual act that's being engaged in here. But to set the record straight, when you hear the term dancing boys or bakibazi, you should think little boy hookers made to dance in confined areas surrounded by disgusting males who grab the boys sexually while they gyrate around the space, engaging in dancing dressed as little girls, and during the process the watchers will slip money into their underwear or throw money at them. Typically there's also a progression of getting more and more naked. It is utterly vile. And this specific dancing boy incident, as we know, went on for 45 minutes based on the own testimony of these government officials before the boy was taken away. Now I find it humorous in the darkest way possible that the email references that no sex took place. Well, first of all, it wouldn't be sex, it'd be rape. Second of all, this is a child and no sex didn't take place there, but anyone who's looked into the dancing boy phenomena even for the slightest bit, and even those who haven't, can probably imagine what happens to a boy like this afterwards. But I'm going to specify just so we know for sure. Once again, this information comes from a massive documentary that went to Afghanistan and interviewed dancing boys and their families and the people who buy them. And what we learn is that after a dancing boy finishes his routine, he will then be auctioned off to the highest bidder for a night or many nights, really however long said individual can afford. And once that person has purchased the child, basically becomes their property for an extended period of time, however long they choose. And I'm assuming you can guess, but we will state emphatically once again, what happens during this time is violent rape of these little boys, and it's testified to both by the dancing boys, their parents, and the people who purchased them. If one of these boys tries to escape, they're fortunate if they end up even remotely alive. Most commonly, they will end up dead, as they've committed a crime in the eyes of the people who bought them. And unsurprisingly, these events are common across the entirety of Afghanistan. The government is fully aware of them and are attended to by, you guessed it, the wealthy and powerful in that region. So we now have one Afghani political official asking another American political official to help cover up his child rape ring, and this other official is also accused of being involved in the same ilk of activities. Got it. And we do know the government did cover this up, along with the Afghan Minister of the Interior, as I imagine the majority of you listening to this now have never before even heard of the dancing boy situation. And as we stated, the video cannot be found, so some degree of cover-up has occurred. But the real question is then, why is Hillary getting emailed personally about this by one of her most prominent attorneys? She's meant to be biased in the interests of America and its people as Secretary of State, not in foreign countries. But clearly, her emails and those related to her suggest that something deeper is at play, that perhaps this ring in Afghanistan isn't so isolated to Afghanistan. And its contractors are not just up to no good in that neighborhood, but are up to no good in many neighborhoods. In fact, issues with Dine Corp specifically can be found in Hillary's emails going as far back as at least January 1st of 2001, when Dine Corp was caught once again in a, quote, continuing pattern of allegations, meaning these nefarious acts were happening in the 1990s and possibly even before. In fact, we are very certain they were happening before, because as we will find out, this Afghan situation, and likely Dine Corp as a whole, is just a wheel in a much larger machine based on these activities. employees, because the locals of countries aren't reported as only having issues with Dine Corp in the Middle East. Indeed, Dine Corp has a rap sheet that would make Dahmer blush. For instance, in Ukraine, Russia, Moldova. In fact, you know what? You just pick an Eastern European country. Dine Corp has likely been there and had problems, especially in those two countries I listed. Dine Corp and its contractors are reported by hundreds of eyewitnesses and citizens who just want the best for their people, as abducting their children, establishing trafficking rings, and raping children, among many other things. One major incident is in war-torn Bosnia, where Dine Corp employees were accused of raping, purchasing, and selling children, most often girls as young as 12, at least. And this became a major incident in Bosnia with a ton of public reaction and anger, but seems to have mysteriously, or perhaps not so mysteriously, fallen short of the ears of the American mainstream media. Darn, such a shame, right? I wonder how that happened. And these employees and contractors were there to take care of planes. So in theory, just worth adding, convenient and direct access to a way of transporting children internationally. And we know that Dine Corp has had a history of transporting heroin and other drugs internationally, but that's an aside. But child trafficking is something that they have been accused of many times, as we've stated. But I digress. Considering then that this is all pretty public information, one should ask what happened to these contractors who were seen accused and have literal evidence, even videos, of being engaged in these acts with children. Were they arrested, tossed in a gulag, perhaps strapped to a few car batteries and a pasta strainer for a hat? No, not at all. Most of them just got sent back to the States, continued their careers, and likely got some cushy executive jobs. Some were arrested, but their sentences are pretty obscure if they ever got one. And it makes sense that many of these guys actually got promoted, since you can't have an at least 3-decade-long problem with this sort of activity without some degree of company support. A company, mind you, that is 100% dependent on your money and my money. But it doesn't stop there. One may argue that Dine Corp, which Hillary appears to be covering directly for, may not have been aware of these issues until then. Well, as stated, that's not true, as they've had a long history of such issues and have been visited before, but in these emails we see Hillary's top attorney discussing going to visit Dine Corp's CEO to discuss these accusations and the problems that keep happening with their company. Although I wager that the problem in the government's eyes was not that they were doing such things, but more so that the problem got out to the public. In fact, there is another incident with Dine Corp that would suggest that in Bosnia, where an employee named Ben Johnson uncovered a slavery ring being run by his fellow Dine Corp employees, and guess what happened to him? He was fired and sent back to the States. But in case we didn't think these Dine Corp folks were international enough, they are accused of these same exact actions in Colombia. And if this were a Dine Corp video, I wouldn't stop there, we would keep going. Because the list does continue, and yes, the company is still active today. And even though Hillary is no longer in office, it certainly appears to have the exact same protections because no one is suffering the consequences of this behavior. And this is the same company that Hillary's top attorney made sure to alert her of when the dancing boy news broke, and that the Afghan Minister of the Interior wanted her to cover up. And this same minister then went and arrested people in the police force who knew of the issue, not who had participated in it. So then I gotta ask you a question. Can it get more obvious than this? And as you'll see in episode 3, the answer is yes. Thank you so much, you guys, for watching this video. It really does mean a lot. And for you guys who made it all the way to the end, comment Dine Corp is sus. If you made it this far, we'll confuse everyone else. I just want to say thank you again, though, for everyone who's being here and who's been here and supported the channel. Special shout out to everyone on the Patreon, like Paul, the Prince of Patreon. You know, appreciate you. But I appreciate every single one of you guys, whether it's a view, a like, a sub, a donation. It means the world to me, so thank you. And I want to also say a special thank you to everybody, because we just hit 100,000 subscribers. What? I looked at it. This last September, I was talking about how I just hit 1,000 subscribers. Now we've hit 100,000. God is good. So thank you to every single one of you, and hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.